Hi, Pastor Greg here behind the mask as we have our second video on the series of how to navigate tragedy with your children. We gave you some basic things: routine, listen to your kids, control social media, watch for certain signs. But that was just in the first few hours. Now we're 48 hours out, and we want to give you something a little more meaty, some things that you can take and work on, and some hopefully great resources that you can apply. And I have today my friend Jamie Peterson, and I'm so glad she is a friend. And Jamie, can you tell us what you do, where you work?
Yeah, so I work for Central Minnesota Mental Health Center. I'm a school-based therapist, so I work with children in school, and I get to see them during their school day to make it easy to get to services. And my agency works in several towns up in this area, and we go all the way up to like St. Cloud, and have quite a number of services that fall within that, but several schooling therapists as well.
And so you work with kids who are having a hard time, and maybe kids who experience trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would like to take full advantage of your experience and your training. So for our parents, what are some practical steps they can take to walk their children and themselves through this tragedy?
Mm-hmm. So really, when we think about good mental health and we think about learning how to handle these traumatic events together, we're kind of focusing on the really basic things at the beginning. So we're thinking about sleep and exercise and eating and doing things that kind of give you the chance to create and to keep forming things, connections with each other, making things together. So when you're working with your family, you're looking at, like you had mentioned in the previous video, keeping your schedule as much as you can, helping your kids wind down before they go to sleep so that they can process some of the things that make sleep hard. You want to be sure they're still getting good exercise, playing outside if it's not super freezing out, being able to move their bodies, being able to spend time together, having that closeness, making sure that you're eating meals just like your kids are, and making sure that you're taking care of your body and that you've got those foundational building blocks in place for your health and for your kids' health too.
So one thing I hear from some parents is, we've had COVID, we've had the riots, we've had the social unrest over the elections and all that. And this is one more thing, and I'm overwhelmed in trying to deal with this personally, but also how do I care for my kids? Any self-help for parents there?
I think, like you said, a really good starting spot is saying, I'm overwhelmed by this, and knowing that it's okay to not be okay right now, and it would be really unexpected for someone to feel like they were okay at this point. We've had so many things happen, and those things build up in our bodies and in our hearts and in our minds, and they become really heavy to carry. So I think for parents to start there and say, today might be the day that we do the basics. We make it through today, and then tomorrow we make it through tomorrow, and to not be thinking that they have to reach these superhuman skills or be able to do everything that they used to do before all of this happened. That's not really a reasonable expectation to have of anyone, including ourselves. And for parents to realize, like, kids regulate with, they don't regulate alone. So parents can't give their kids calm and support if they're not feeling that themselves. So if parents can model looking for help themselves, if they can say it's okay to feel things, it's okay to need some help figuring out what to do next, those are the most important skills parents can give kids.
So how do parents help children feel safe during this time? Because I've talked with parents who have said, hey, I'm not even sure how to tell my kid because my kid's on the timid side anyway, and I'm afraid they're going to fixate on this. And other kids are, coming home and hearing stuff from the playground or hearing stuff on the news, and they're feeling afraid. How do parents help children practically feel safe during this time?
I think it's really important to start with facts as much as we know about them. That can feel really scary for parents when kids are already kind of anxious or feeling scared to go to school or things like that, and that's been happening already. I think sometimes it feels like we should protect them from knowing about things. But because of social media use and because kids are curious creatures, um, it, kids know about things already, and I think it's best that your child hears from you so that you're there with them to help them understand as much as we can know right now. I think it's important for parents to know that it's okay to say they don't know. If a kid asks a question that you don't have an answer for yet, it's okay to say that you don't know and that we might not know for a while. I think we sometimes want to be with our kids when that anxiety is happening because we love them and we want them to be okay. But there's also a really powerful lesson in helping kids see that we can do hard things even when they're hard. And it's okay to be afraid, but we also know that we have to trust the people that we love and the people who will be there for us. We talk to kids about, we can't predict the world, so I can't promise you that something bad won't happen. But I can promise that you will have people in your life who will love you and who will be with you when those things are happening, and that you will be okay. Feelings are like ocean waves, they're going to come in and go out. And that's the same as the really difficult things in our lives. They're going to show up, but they will fade back again too, and we will be okay.
Now, is there some sort of standard, like at 3 years of age we can reveal this much to kids, and 5 this much, and 7 this much, or is it really customized to where your child's at?
Yeah, it's pretty fluid. Kids develop in such different ways and have different capacity for absorbing information too. So parents are the experts on their kids. They know what their kids are capable of hearing. I think at almost any age, it's better to give as the facts in an appropriate way. But kids will often kind of direct that conversation. They'll bring their questions. I know for a lot of parents it feels scary because it feels like you have to say the right thing, and there really isn't a right thing to say. There's a lot of right things that you can say. And keeping that door open for your kids is really what matters the most, and letting them know that as those questions come up, they can keep coming back to you and asking, that there's nothing that's off limits, but you might put some boundaries in place and kind of specify between kid world and adult world. So in kid world, I might give you a simple answer, and there might be a lot more to it, but you might not be ready for that, and that's a boundary that I might hold for you and kind of keep you aware of as much as is suitable right now. But kids, I think you actually mentioned this in that video, they kind of, when they're processing stuff, it's not quite the way adults will, so they'll kind of ask a couple questions, and then you might feel like you're really delivering this wonderful thing that's going to help them a lot, and then they're like, spaghetti, and then they're gone. So, your kids will really kind of direct it, and you'll be able to feel in your relationship with your child where they're at and what they're ready for.
I think I heard something very powerful there. Parents do not have to be perfect in this situation.
Correct.
They just have to be with them.
Yep. Being with is the foundational thing. If you are with your child, if you're that solid person that they know is in their corner and with them, that's going to be the number one thing that creates that safety that you were talking about. So
now, what questions should a parent be asking their kid during this time?
I was actually talking to my boss about that, as families have lots of questions about how do I help my kid, how do I make sure my kid's not keeping something a secret from me that they're feeling, or things like that. So one of the really powerful phrases I've heard is just asking your kids, what have you heard and what are you feeling? And if you can keep kind of cycling through those two, they'll get through the stuff that's coming up. And that'll help you know how much you need to share with them as well. And it'll give you the opportunity to kind of correct inconsistencies or things that they've picked up on the playground that might not be accurate.
So with children, that old rule, you've got 2 ears, 1 mouth, use it in that proportion is good with kids. Listen twice as much before you give an opinion.
Yeah, yeah. Question. I think we feel pressure to ask a lot of questions, but kids are pretty open with what they know, and if they're not feeling ready to talk about it, our questions don't always help create readiness for that. It's more likely for them to feel a little resistant if we're asking lots of questions on top of each other. So just making open space and having some silence that they can fill if they need to is helpful.
Now, I know one of the areas you have some experience in is working with what has been traditionally known as special needs or children with unique challenges. And for the parent at home who is watching and say, my child is on this scale or that scale or wrestles with this syndrome, how do we shape that for their unique needs? Can you give us just some insight on how that parent can react?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so kids with neurodevelopmental disorders, like if your child's on the autism spectrum or even kids with ADHD or like some intellectual challenges, they're going to probably process a little bit differently even than other kids will. So sometimes that looks like having really odd questions or things that to us don't seem related, but for them are connected in a different way, or it can be wanting to know a lot about one particular detail or getting kind of fixated on one certain aspect of something. A lot of times you'll see things show up in their play more, like themes as they're playing. They'll kind of play the same story or the same idea out a lot, and that can be kind of concerning for parents, especially if those themes are like violent or about death or dying, things like that. But it's a pretty typical way to process through play, and even through art, sometimes they'll be drawing and the same themes will show up repeatedly, and sometimes those can be about violence or death too. And as a parent, it's okay to acknowledge that might bring up some really big feelings in you and some worry for your child, but it's not an unexpected way to process, especially if your brain just organizes itself a little bit differently.
Thank you also for using the proper terms. Folks, if I offended at all by using some of the terms I used, I apologize. It's just out of ignorance. And that's why we're having this video, so that we can be educated and helped. So, question, you mentioned play. How would we play with our kids? How would we do art with our kids?
There's no one right way to do it. In my work, I use sand tray a lot, so kids will use lots of different figurines and play in the sand and create scenes. And in my role, I will sometimes ask them to show me something. So I might say, like, show me what it's feeling like inside of you, or tell me a story about what you were thinking when this happened, or I can kind of give prompts like that, which parents can do also. Kids might respond a little bit differently, because unfortunately parents sometimes get the short end of that stick. But just joining your kids in play or observing when they're playing. I think sometimes when kids are playing, it's like, phew, I can finally do something without having people right next to me the whole time. But if you can be there and kind of observe what they're playing, ask questions, or that is a good time for questions, is when they're playing. You can say, like, tell me about that guy, or when something's happening, you can say, like, I wonder what that person's family thinks about that, or does that character have a mom, and what does that mom do, or things like that can kind of help kids think differently about stories. A lot of times with the themes, you'll see things like they'll be playing battles, and maybe it's they'll say, like, nobody can save them, they have to do all these things, and then you can kind of introduce hope into that by saying, like, what if there was someone who could come in and save, or could come in and help, or what if this happened? And they'll respond to that and kind of start to change how they play over time.
Now, you mentioned earlier sleep. What if a child's having problems with sleep? What are some practical things you can do to help a child sleep?
Sleep can be one of the most difficult pieces, so I'm not going to sugarcoat that. Sleep can be really hard to come by when there's trauma and grief and things like that. One of the biggest things is to regulate the body, because our brain and our body are in constant conversation about whether we're safe or not. And our breath is one of the main ways that they communicate. So if you can work with your child on how to take deeper breaths and slow down the breath and tune into their body and pay attention to what they're noticing. Sometimes we do something, we do the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So you can look at like 5 things that you see and 4 things you hear, and you can move through the senses just to help them kind of tune into the present moment. I've encouraged families to do things like maybe put on an audiobook and color together for a little bit before bed, or do some of those calming, more hands-on types of activities. And if you can kind of give them that space and be together. And I know a big question that comes up from a lot of parents is, what if my kid wants to come sleep with me, right now? And what I say is, go for it. If they want to come in and sleep with you and it's not like really bugging you, that's fine. When they're ready to be back on their own, they will. And it's not going to like stunt their ability to sleep on their own if they need to come back and sleep closer to you for a little bit.
And I heard you say audiobooks, so I'm taking it that screens right before bed aren't necessarily a good idea.
Correct. We know the research about blue light, so we know that's not such a big thing. A more concerning piece of that is the content. So,
okay.
Anything that's going to rev up the brain or energize the brain. So sometimes we think like, well, it's just a YouTube video, like it'll be okay. But that can still, even just interest can perk up the brain and not allow it to fall asleep. Or we can kind of get stuck in that distraction cycle and not be able to sleep for that reason. So I know sometimes it's hard because kids are not really a fan of having their electronics not available to them. So sometimes that feels like, hard to do because we want our kids to be happy. But sometimes that's the boundary that's helpful to hold as the parent is to say, you can be a little mad about that, and we're not going to have them right before bed. I will say it works best if you can model it along with them, which is really unfortunate because I also like to look at my phone before I go to sleep. But it's most helpful if it's sort of a family culture piece that you can build.
So I also heard you keep routine, so eat meals together. The family table is a great place during this time. Also, what are some future steps that you would take? I mean, we're still in the 48 hours, but what about a week from now? What about 2 weeks from now? Are there any things that parents should be working towards?
Yeah, I guess I would pay particular attention to like the 2 week to 1 month mark. That tends to be when kind of the hubbub around things starts to settle, and some of the supports that are temporary and are in place start to kind of fade back, and that can be the time when things really hit fully. We're kind of in a response mode before that, and then when those things die down, all of a sudden we confront our own emotions about things, and we're less in that response and more in that now what phase. So I think one of the things you can do is kind of be aware of that time and be prepared for that to be kind of difficult and to need some other support during that time. I think a really helpful thing families can do is build new traditions or think about ways that they can kind of make things special or do something different that's fun. Maybe family dinner is in the blanket fort this week, or like, you can kind of build in just some play and some whimsy into your life to kind of create space for things to look forward to, ways to anticipate. Sometimes when we've gone through really difficult things, it feels like what we're waiting for is the next wrong thing to happen, the next scary thing or difficult thing, especially since we've had so many of them this year. So if you can kind of turn that on its head and create something to anticipate that is fun and will actually be a joyful experience, that can really help create a sense of well-being.
Excellent. Any signs that parents should watch for, things that make them go, hey, I may need to take them to professional help?
Yeah, I think anytime you see kind of a change in patterns, it's a good opportunity to be curious. So, if your child can't sleep 1 or 2 or 3 nights, that's pretty expected. But if it's been like 2 weeks and they're saying that they're having nightmares and really struggling to sleep, and they seem to have a lot more temper tantrums, or they're a lot more cranky than usual, or anything where there's like this change in the pattern of behavior, it's a good time to just go and talk to someone. I think sometimes we feel like going to therapy or counseling is like a really big decision that might, change everything about what's happening in our lives. But there's a lot of freedom in that, and you remain in control throughout that process. So you can go in and talk to someone, and you might go once, you might go 4 times, you might go for a year. It just depends. And the person that you're seeing will talk to you about what they're seeing and what they think might be going on, and you will be an equal partner in that for your child.
And, I've sat with you. You're not a scary person.
Generally not.
Generally not. We could ask family about that, but and most of the counselors are there to help,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So changes in patterns, problems with sleep, things like that are signs just to keep an eye on.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I'm also hearing is that there are some good places to take kids.
Mm-hmm.
What are some places you might recommend? And can you give us any direction on that?
Yeah. Well, like I said, Central Minnesota's in a lot of places, and I like my coworkers. I think they're great, so you could always start there. Also, because I work in the schools, I have that connection as well. So a lot of times your child's school will either have someone who's based there, or can kind of like the social worker in the building, or the counselor or the principal can help you get like a list of who's around, so that you feel like you have choice and options about who you go to see. So that's usually a good starting spot if you just kind of want to know what's available. It's usually a really good spot to start with your child's school. If your child is homeschooled or isn't in school yet, you can contact like community ed offices will have lists. County social services will have lists of providers in the area, things like that. And those are good places to start as well, because that way you can look for someone who sees your age child, or can look for someone who can see you as well. Many providers will do family therapy and individual therapy or counseling at the same time. So, if an adult wants to go in and get some help and then also do some family with their kids, they can do that. There's a lot of different ways to coordinate your care, so it's helpful to just kind of find a starting spot, and that person should be able to help you look for the other things that will be helpful to you as well.
You just said something big. Not only are we looking at care for kids, but it's okay, mom and dad, that if you need to go see somebody, you go see somebody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because your kids are going to take your cues. They're going to follow from you. So if you're not feeling good, you should go in, and it's okay to take care of you.
Yeah, and important, because really you hold the space for your family, and if you're struggling, it's not to your benefit or your kids' benefit to try to be okay when you're not okay. It doesn't have to be so hard, and you don't have to do it by yourself. It's okay, and it's good to model for your kids that when things are hard, I ask for help, and it's okay.
So as we bring this to a close, are there last thoughts you'd like to share with our folks? This is your chance to be able to share what's on your heart.
Yeah. I would say that the most important thing that families can remember is that this series of events, this cumulative weight of what's happening in our lives, is not something we've experienced before. It's going to bring up a lot of things from our past. It's going to bring up a lot of stories about who we are and what we think we're capable of. And the world can start to feel really dark and really scary and really big. And when the world is like that, we feel a lot of emotions about it, and we start to kind of feel overwhelmed by it or feel other things. But a kid that I was meeting with a couple weeks ago asked me about that phrase, that it's better to light a candle than to curse the darkness. and he was really curious about what that meant. So we talked about that when the darkness is there, we kind of have these go-to ways of coping with darkness. And sometimes we feel like we want to hunker down and we just want to hide from it and hope that it goes away, or we want to deny that it's there in the first place and do whatever we want to do. Sometimes we want to yell and push back and be angry about it, and other times we're kind of swamped by the grief of it. But none of those things really actually make the darkness go away. Darkness is kind of part of being a human in a human world. But when we choose to light candles, then we create space that's light. And if enough candles are lit, then the darkness is going to start to change and to recede. So we talked about what does it look like to be a person that lights a candle. And we think of candles as like, maybe I have to go and do this world-changing thing, and maybe I have to do this giant thing. But really, a candle is just a little light. But it's going to be enough when we put them together. And so if you can talk with your kids about what it looks like to be light in a dark world, and you can talk about what you can do together to create change or to bring goodness into people's lives, that's what's really going to change the world, and that's what's going to change that darkness and make you feel like it's not going to overwhelm you. And your kids are going to feel that too. Kids are kind of naturally light people, sometimes not so much behaviorally, but most of the time we're all kind of just looking for that light. And instead of feeling trapped by the dark, we can work together to make it light again.
Wow, powerful. Thank you so much. And again, if they need to call, they can call your agency, which is
Central Minnesota Mental Health Center.
And there's a spot here, even in Buffalo. There's a site.
Yep.
Am I correct? Okay.
Yep.
Also, friends, if you go to the buffalofree.org page, go to Family Ministries. We have put together a number of resources that you can download, things on how to talk with your kids, how to talk with your teens. I believe there's also links to a few videos. Also, we want to let you know that we are here for you, and please do not hesitate to call if we can be of any help. We also want to just again thank Jamie for coming in and taking part of her day to share with us. So thank you again. Hope this video was of encouragement to you, and have a great day.